Hi, everyone. Welcome to HE Dialogues. I'm Edric,
I'm Joy.
and we're here to help you parent
Right
from the
from the
start. So let's get going. So we had a pretty fun first episode for those of you that watched or listened to it, and this is really a passion project, right? As we closed the last time, you get giddy. You really get giddy when you talk about parenting, family, homeschooling. So these are a lot of your loves, and as you know me, this is also a deep passion for me, and so between the two of us, you're on the ground doing the stuff. I'm the one building the stuff around it to keep making it possible for us and for folks. So let's go into what we promised the people listening and watching the last episode, which is what is our story? I mean, how did we come about this whole parenting and home educating, homeschooling journey? Premising it with those that didn't listen or hear, you actually were homeschooled for 3 years. Your mom had this desire to do it and got the blessing of your dad, and she undertook the whole journey. So let's start with that, babe. I mean, when we first started dating many years ago, did you already have this idea that, if I marry this guy, we're gonna homeschool? Bring me back to that moment.
Why do you think I picked you?
Ooh,
Because I knew you'd be
pick
a good
me,
dad.
right? Wait a
You would be
minute.
willing to homeschool.
When you say pick me, I think it was inevitable, right? It's inevitable. I mean,
Pick me. I'm
who
kidding.
else? Who else
Okay.
would you have chosen? So, but no,
No,
modest aside.
do you remember when we were in college
Mm.
and we were talking about the future and we were
Dating.
having
Were we dating already, or this is one of our
maybe
like
getting to know you,
getting
or
to
we
know
would have
you?
been dating early stages, and we both talked about how we wanted to be in education someday. Do you remember
I
that?
do very clearly. There were a few things that stood out in our first few conversations. First, it was talks about God,
Yeah.
like, whoa, this is weird, right? I mean, you had
It
your
wasn't weird
vantage
for me.
point. I had my vantage point. It's not a common conversation for people starting to get to know each other, right? That was one. I was like, whoa, interesting girl. Um, the really interesting girl. The second was, I think I got to hear about this homeschooling thing from you then when you were
Maybe
talking about it a little bit. I'm like, you what? What is that? And then the third thing was we started talking about education. Why were we talking about education
we
early
talked
on?
about a lot of things. I mean, we were always talking, I
Well,
think,
why were
even
we
dating.
dreaming about education and doing
Well,
something
now I
different?
think looking back, we see why, because I think God really brought us together because He had put it in our heart, not just to homeschool our own children, but to create educational systems for people to be able to
Yeah.
homeschool.
So we were dreaming about doing something different,
Yeah.
right? And then I can't remember how we
And
started
then
talking
boom,
about it.
marriage, children, homeschooling. That's
Right.
how we got to fast forward.
Okay. So why did we end up with the homeschooling in the actual uh parenting context?
Okay.
So Elijah was
All right. So as soon as I gave birth,
3.
and for anyone who's been a mom, you know that feeling that you have when you are so attached to your child and you can't imagine being separated from them. And that's just the feeling that I had when I gave birth to my first son, Elijah. And I just wanted to be with him all the time. And I found that because he was with me all the time, there were so many teachable moments. I mean, we would be going up and downstairs and I'd be counting 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, we made a teaching moment out of everything. We'd be riding in the car and then I'd be pointing out to things and look, that is a telephone pole. This is what is this? I would always start off like this. Elijah, what is this? This is a. So eventually he understood that I was trying to teach him. So by the time he was like,
By
before
the way,
he
I
was,
don't remember any of this. This is
you
new for me.
remember this?
No, so I'm learning from you about our own family. So,
So by the time he was almost 2 years old, he was speaking in complete sentences and he was very articulate and he was very easy to teach because from the very beginning, the mindset was, I want to just be teaching him all the time, whatever I can. He's my first child. You know, you're so excited. So you're so invested. As the years went by and I had more and more children, I became less and less, I think, intentional.
but
But anyway,
bring me
with
back to
Elijah.
that first stage. So the
So
first few years,
yes.
it
So then in those years, right, then I realized, you know what? I don't think that I want to send Elijah to school. I wish Edric would be on the same page about it, that I think we should homeschool
Because
because I had experienced it and it was so wonderful for me. And I thought, this is the way that I really want to raise our kids. But I knew that as a wife, that I couldn't impose that on Edric because I knew that if God was really to bless this desire of mine, that we would have to be 100% aligned, that he would have to say an absolute yes to us doing it. And when I asked him at first, he was like,
what is this homeschooling thing, right? So again, I learned about it. I can't remember the exact moment, but my first impression was, what in the world is this home stuff?
yeah.
I honestly, so when I was getting to know Joy and her family, there were some question marks in my mind, right? Because I came from a private school in the Philippines, and it was a very well reputed school, and I came from this mindset
Mm,
of send your kid to the best school so they'll do well in life. That was kind of my mindset. My,
mm,
my dad had come from the same school all the way through. He did well for himself. He went off to an Ivy League on the West Coast, right, at
mm.
Stanford and West Coast of the US. And so I thought that was the way to go. That was the way to learn. That was the way to send your kids to a school. And
Which
so
is
when I heard,
okay. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So no, so when I heard about this homeschooling thing, I'm like, what is this thing? And so there was a little bit of concern, honestly, and a little bit of curiosity when I heard it. I'm like, because that's Joy. You know, when I got to know you, she did not come from that normal landscape of the private schools in the Philippines. And as a Philippine raised person, we knew like there were stereotypes for each of these schools. So I'm like, which box does this girl fit in? You didn't seem to fit in any of them. So I was always so
Isn't that why you like me?
that's
Because
what attracted
I
me
didn't
honestly to
fit
you.
into
I was
any
so
box.
curious. I'm like, who is this Joy? It's like this mystery. What is this school that she came from? You know, even her school, which is called Faith Academy. I did not know, it was not in the radar of most
Okay.
Filipinos. So here she is talking about this homeschooling thing. And as I'm curious about the homeschooling, I was reluctant because I didn't think there'd be any other way for our children and for people to do well apart from going to
Hmm.
a top school. That was my
Right.
mindset.
Mm.
So maybe the question is, what turned in your memory? What turned for me? And then I'll validate it if you get it. What turned? Because there was a turning point. Because
Yeah.
we even had fights, I think,
We
right?
probably did.
We did
We
some
probably did. No, I wouldn't say
heated
fight.
discussions, some very
Discussion.
heated discussions
Discussion.
about this is why, you
Yeah.
think it made
I think
sense.
I would present the pros and cons, and then you would have your own concerns. But I think that's what made for a healthy discussion about it, right? And I also had to really pray. And so I really prayed that God would speak to Edric. And by the time Elijah turned 3 years old, Edric started to notice that he was very advanced in certain areas. Academically, for sure, he was advanced.
Because of the things that Joy just shared. I didn't know. She was articulate,
Because
was able to identify things. And um I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, but and I'm sharing this only because it's not because Elijah is so special. He is special to us for sure. But if you would observe other parents, whether they homeschool or not, who are just very intentional right from the start about teaching their children, using teachable moments, the children do tend to be academically advanced because what do they really learn in preschool? Shapes, colors, numbers, basic things, letters, sounds. And parents can do that, can already be homeschooling whether they're doing it formally or not, because it's a way of life. It's a perspective,
Mm.
how you approach. It's a consciousness as a parent that I have this great relationship with my child and I'm going to teach them right along the way. So when you saw that,
When I saw
then
that,
you realize, huh,
yeah, no. So the critical point for us was when we were deciding whether we were going to send him to a preschool or not,
mhm,
right?
yeah,
I mean, all the things you're
3 years
talking
old. Yeah.
about 3 years old, and this is still very clear to me. When we were deciding, that's when it became tense because you were like, maybe we should just keep going with the
Mhm,
home
mhm,
educating or
yeah.
homeschooling that you were doing. Whereas I was like, we should send him to preschool. I went to a preschool. I turned out well. I mean, that kind of mindset. And I'm sure
Yeah.
everyone listening, many people listening are saying, yep, that's me. What changed is when I saw two things, and this is what changed my whole perspective, even on learning and education. When I saw character, there was something about Elijah's obedience.
Mm.
at 3 years old that was very different from how I knew myself to be, how
Mm.
I've known many kids to be, because we had a lot of friends with kids, we had relatives, and I grew up seeing a lot of kids. As many of you are empathizing with me right now, or relating to me. I remember Elijah's obedience was very different. He had a tender-heartedness to him that was very refreshing. He wasn't one of these quiet, shy boys. He was very articulate, very outspoken. But when daddy says no, he says, okay, dad. I was like, this is
Mm.
obviously we did something on the parenting
Yeah.
front. We helped discipline and do those things. But that obedience and that character at a very young age was something very
Yeah.
um refreshing. So I said, okay, if this is what homeschooling can help keep doing, I want more. The second was, he was not just very obedient, but he was very curious. Elijah loved to learn, like loved it. I remember that there would be, I can't, it's a blur in my mind now whether we were already formally going to the homeschooling or this was before, but he would be listening to you teaching some stuff,
Mm.
and then you'd be like, okay, honey, mommy's tired, I'm done. And he would say, mommy, I want more.
Oh,
Do
yeah.
you remember that? So he'd be like, mom, I want more.
Okay.
And I would see Joy visibly like, oh, she's tired already. Just talking about things and him learning. So that those two traits,
Hmm.
his
Curiosity.
obedience, his
Mhm.
character, and that curiosity for me,
PNC.
CNC. So I
Yeah.
said, let's keep going. I don't think I was set on let's do this forever,
Mm.
but I said, let's keep going. That's what
Yeah,
happened.
that was so exciting for me. So one of the things he's referring to is I remember I would be reading to him like the Chronicles of Narnia,
Yeah.
Elijah, and I'd be falling asleep, like reading it and then falling asleep. He'd be like, "Mom, mom, mom, don't fall asleep. You have to read it." And he was just so engaged, so getting teary eyed.
It's a little bit because he's a man now, right? He's a big guy, he's bigger than me. Um,
Yeah,
but I remember his face, I
yeah,
remember him as that little boy. He's big brown eyes. He's
yeah,
so curious and hungry. And so yeah, I'm remembering that Chronicles of Narnia now.
yeah. So then what happened was, okay, we decided to do this. Let's send him 2 days a week to a Montessori school. We asked for permission from them. We said, can we just pay for 2 days a week?
Mm.
And then we'll homeschool our son for the 3 days of the week. And they agreed miraculously. And we did that. And by the first semester, we asked Elijah, do you want to keep going to the school? Because it's a great school. You're having fun there. Or would you rather just be homeschooled? And he said, Mom, I'd rather just be with you. I'd rather be homeschooled. And so that was it. And that was the only classroom experience he ever had, or none of our children ever had a classroom
So
experience.
fast forward, he tried to sit in, right? In the high school levels. We
Yeah.
were thinking about sending him. But I think as we wind this down, part of my looking back, and one of the things that we're privileged to see now is he's done with his homeschooling. I mean,
Mm.
the formal part where we talked about parent-led home-based education, which is once again the definition we like to work with. The formal education part, K through 12, right? He's done with that. And for parents who are wondering, does it really work? Let's get the elephant out of the room. We have a little bit of perspective now.
Mm.
Would you say
Before you,
go
before you
ahead.
say that, I just wanted to add the spiritual aspect, because to be honest, this has been so foundational for us and the reason why we keep going. And I think it's the only reason why it's been successful so far, right? It's really by God's grace at the end of the day. But Deuteronomy 6, verse 5 to 7 has been the bedrock of our homeschooling experience. And it says, right,
Love the
love
Lord
the Lord your God.
with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These words that I give you today are to be on your heart.
Teach them to your children.
Teach them to your children
When you
when
sit
you
at,
sit at home, you lie down,
when you walk along
walk
the
along
way.
walk along the way,
Yeah.
right? So, and I was actually going to close with that.
Oh, you were.
Yes.
This is
So
what
let me,
happens when there's no script.
yeah, but I love it. We love it this way, right?
Right.
So before we close with that, because that's how I wanted to close, and that's I think how we should close, because this is getting it right from the start. So our son, after the 12th grade, he graduates, right? Which happens even for homeschoolers. And as he graduates, what encouraged me as a dad, because when we first started, and maybe some people are going through this situation now, you're thinking about, do I want to do homeschooling, or you're trying it, and people are like, why are you doing that? We hear so many stories, believe me, countless stories of people who get great feedback, but also people who get criticized or challenged, or even, there could be even more tense situations. So I was actually wondering, from the moment where I said, let's take this forward, I didn't know how far we would go. But because we were able to look back, when our son took the SATs, so for those not familiar, the SATs are standardized achievement tests that is given for primarily American or US colleges as a gold standard, if you will, to see if you can get into schools. Out of a perfect 1600 in the run that they gave for our son, he scored a 1540. And we didn't even understand. I didn't know what that meant, because I didn't take the SAT. You did, right? When we understood from the American context, from the schools who we were talking to, they said that, did you know that that basically means he's in the top 1% academically? I was deeply affirmed that, when I was concerned whether he would get a good education, the learning, will he actually be able to get deep knowledge that he can then apply? The tests showed that it worked, and that was deep for me. Right? And there's a whole other story surrounding that, but that was deep for me, and there's so many other things related to that. But the reason I wanted to inject that, even just a small thing, is not to draw attention to him. So son, if you're listening to this is not about you, and it's not about us, but it's to just encourage parents that it does work if you are concerned. That's part of the affirmation of our story. But to your point earlier, it's not so much the teaching, the things that we shared about what Joy would do. And yes, there's the character, which is also very important, which is something that helped him get to that point, because if they don't obey, they will not have the capability to do the work that they need to do, and all the other character traits necessary to go the distance. But what really affirmed it for us is, on top of the character and the ability to apply himself in tests like that, is how, and he should speak to this at some point, we'll guest him here, but that most important thing, Deuteronomy 6:5-7, when we look at our son and he's affirmed this, the thing that drives him, the thing that keeps him going, the things that holds him even while he is in the US and we are in the Philippines, is that he loves God with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength. And that's something that became the centerpiece, if you will, of our whole parenting journey and even education journey. It is to make sure that our kids and the parents that we journey with and their kids and the system that we have helped build now is to make sure that parents focus on that one measure of success. Do we help our children create an environment so that they will love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength? So, any final words?
When I think about it, again, it was the main reason for why we started, the reason why we've kept going. And it's also the goal to which, right, we keep aspiring to. And so when I said it was the bedrock of our homeschooling, it's also the bedrock of our parenting. And homeschooling has just been a means for us to pursue that goal and live by it. And we're extremely grateful that God allowed us to homeschool, because at the end of the day, I think it's really him who directed us to that and allowed you to say yes as a husband and support me
Right.
as a wife to do it and work hard.
And this is why we're so
I can
passionate.
be at home.
Yeah, and this is why we're so passionate about stuff like this, right?
Yeah.
So that with that main centerpiece, it's a perspective we're now sharing with you, so that once again, we can get it right from the start. Thanks for joining us for this HE Dialogues. I'm Edric.
I'm Joy,
Again, we want to help you parent
right from the start.